and your position. Maybe we'll start with Taylor and go around, and then I'll pose questions after that. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, like Rebecca said, I'm Taylor Velazquez. I work at KUNM News as a public health reporter. So of course that encompasses a lot of health stuff, like you would think COVID, obviously, for the last 3 years have been a real trial for a lot of people. But we're also covering abortion, and I've actually been able to really focus on education and how that intersects with so many different issues that New Mexico faces, from poverty to health outcomes to things like that.
Hi everybody. So my name is Monica Ault. I'm the State Director of the Fines and Fees Justice Center. I'm a former public defender, and I always have to mention that because I feel like once you're a public defender, if you're a true believer, you're always a public defender. I always think about going back, but I'm a little scared because once you don't do trial work anymore, it's a little stressful thinking about going back and inadvertently hurting somebody. But now I do criminal legal reform work, and specifically doing a lot of lobbying and legislative advocacy, and pulling from my time doing direct services as a public defender, because I really truly believe that it can be difficult to transition into policy work if you've never actually done direct services. And I'll just say that my time with the American Studies program really shaped what my career trajectory ended up being, and looking forward to sharing a little bit more about all the fighting that I get to do now.
Hello everybody, my name is Justin Allen. I work in the social justice and civil rights organizing field. I am the inclusive democracy organizer with OLE. OLE stands for Organizers in the Land of Enchantment. We work on early childhood education, workers' rights, citizenship, housing justice, and democracy reform. This year is we just made a win, or we just won a really important piece of legislation called the Voting Rights Act. And one of the pieces that I've been working on specifically is the restoration of voting rights for formerly incarcerated people. But this bill is historical because we're the first. So it was the Voting Rights Act was an omnibus, which is a larger bill package. And what makes this so historical is that we're the first in the nation to implement Native American protections. So New Mexico now will be implementing ballot boxes in tribal areas and in rural communities. Also, we're the 24th state to restore voting rights to formerly incarcerated to people immediately upon release. For me, that's important to reduce recidivism. I feel like when people have a sense of belonging and connection to their community, they're less likely to reoffend. So this provision is just the first step. Now the hard work's going to start. And so I'll pass it to my colleague here.
I feel like your win deserves like a Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Jadira Gurule. I have a weirdly long title right now, but I do a lot of different jobs at the museum at the National Hispanic Cultural Center. So the quick summary is the National Hispanic Cultural Center is a multidisciplinary arts and culture center. We've got a performing arts program, a history and literary arts program, education program, and then the visual arts program, which houses the museum. We're a collecting institution, so we do have a permanent collection that lives on site. And basically, I work with the museum staff to build the collection, keep it safe, put on exhibitions. We work with amazing artists, one of whom is in this room and has been in one of our exhibits, MK. And yeah, so we work. Our mission is global in scope, so we work with New Mexican artists who identify as Hispanic, Latinx, Chicano, but also all throughout Latin America. So it's really global in scope, and present a variety of exhibitions each year. And then we do educational programming with all of that as well. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you all so much for sharing a little bit more about what you do. I wanted to just start by, if you can remember, and our grads, our alums who are here, some have graduated recently, Justin and Taylor. with Monica and Jadira. They have been out for a number of years, but I want to ask, can you remember how you chose the major in American Studies and why you chose to major, or in Jadira's case, she has a master's in American Studies. Why did you choose to do that? So we can go in order, or anyone can just speak if they want to share something about that
I'd like
experience.
to hear from the masters.
Okay. All right, we'll start with Jadira this time.
So I got a bachelor's degree in art history here at UNM, and then was having a hard time finding a job afterwards, and was waiting tables for about 2 years, and decided, I was also interning at the National Hispanic Cultural Center, so just getting to know how museums worked. I think actually I was in college when I learned what a curator was. Like, I didn't really know that was a thing before that. So I was learning all about that stuff, but ultimately realizing that I needed to go back to school if I wanted to continue that work. So when I applied for American Studies, I was obviously looking at art history programs to continue that, and was like just not feeling it. And American Studies had this interdisciplinary nature, I think more of a social justice focus. I really appreciated looking at visual culture and kind of expanding the lens of like the role of art, but also all of the other ways that we see and the impact that has. And so I didn't actually have like a specific intent by the time I was applying of being like, I know that I want to go in and study this. So I wanted an opportunity to kind of like take what my interests were and stretch them a little bit and see what I could do with that. So American Studies kind of rose to the surface for that, and it was actually the only program that I applied to at that time. And so I got in, and it was awesome, and actually really changed my relationship to museum work in a pretty dramatic way. So I'll talk more about that later.
Okay, great. Anyone else think back to that decision?
Yeah, I can go. I came into UNM as a political science major, and then I was suggested to take race, class, and ethnicity. And as I was going through the class, I was like, this is so important to how we just approach, how we interact every single day with all the systems we interact with. It really laid that foundational work, and I was also a journalist at the time, interning, and I was like, this is how everyone should approach their work, but more specifically how I wanted to approach my work being a journalist in New Mexico and dealing with each people and how they're living their lives in relationship to each other, because we are a very diverse community, and how we can talk about that, but also make sure everyone's voice is being heard within their own perspective and lived experiences.
So I'm like, I graduated a really long time ago. So this was actually difficult for me to think back. And, but what I remember, I got into a little bit of trouble when I was younger, just a little bit, maybe a lot more than most. And so when I finally came to college and was going through this, I wasn't really sure where I fit, but I really enjoyed the humanities. I enjoyed sort of digging into things, having a literary analysis to culture and who we are. And there was a couple of classes that I took that they were all cross-listed with American Studies, and it was just so stimulating. And it wasn't as stuffy as I found some of the other classes that I had taken that were still interesting, but I couldn't really see myself taking that anywhere. And some of these classes, some of them were Chicano studies, and one of them was Professor Goldstein's, which was prisons, policing, and American culture. And I will never forget this class because it gave an analysis and words to feelings I had already had with the way that I grew up, and it just made so much sense. And I felt like the American Studies program gave a really productive outlet for sort of the rage and anger and fight that I had in me. And it helped me to channel that into something extremely productive. So I started taking those classes. I'm like, wait, I could do this, like look at these other classes, and they were just so enriching, and that's what made me choose it. And I know this is another question, but it really leads into it, which is there was another class that was cross-listed after I chose American Studies, and it was cross-listed both at the law school and with American Studies, and it was race in the law, and that's what changed. And I read one case that referenced Las Vegas, New Mexico, which is where my family's from, and I listened to a white judge talk about my people in a way that was published and very public, and I was so angry, and that was the turning point for me, that I decided that I wanted to become a lawyer. And that all came from this program. So I'm like forever grateful to this space for that, and I'll never forget it.
I can relate to Monica's experience with the Good Fight. I switched my major from sociology to American Studies because I've had firsthand experience with state violence and incarceration. I believe that transformative justice is more effective than criminal punishment because it seeks to address root causes of harm rather than punitive sanctions. I wanted to be part of a life-affirming institution rather than working in systems that perpetuate harm. I wanted to work and support formerly incarcerated people without being part of the police and probation services. Prior to changing my major, I was already part of a local grassroots chapter, Millions for Prisoners New Mexico, that is a national movement to abolish legalized slavery in the United States. Our priorities include striking the exception clause in the 13th Amendment and universal suffrage. We stand against legislation that expands the prison industrial complex, but we support any legislation that is an investment in humanity. So for me, American Studies was a better fit than sociology because it allowed me to continue working on political and civil rights movement academically. I will say that my experience with American Studies was very emotional. As I was doing my writing and coursework, I was literally in tears writing some of it. And I think that's how I was able to put my heart into my coursework and resist these systems of oppression. Some of the first courses I took really empowered me. I was able to explain my experiences academically and in a way that people took seriously, and I feel that that's been a large part of my success in this work.
Thank you all. I think some of you kind of answered some of the next question. I wanted to ask a little bit, though, about your experiences in American Studies at UNM. Some of you have spoken about the coursework you have taken, or I think Justin made reference to the fact that he worked on a thesis as an undergrad. If there are any other kinds of experiences you'd like to speak about, or if you wanted to talk about how your experiences also impacted your career path, which again, I think some of you spoke to, but maybe not everyone. So let me just ask if anyone would like to say anything more about coursework or how that directed you to your chosen career path.
Yeah, I can go. I think when my courses here were really race and gender. That was like my main focus. And I remember, for example, interweaving that in with my work at KUNM. I remember when lockdown first happened, and then we had just read about intersectionality. And I'm like, okay, so we're all gonna be in our houses with maybe not safe people. Maybe it's not a safe space for some women. And I know, like I said before, New Mexico is so diverse, and we speak so many different languages. And reading in my courses that many domestic violence hotlines and resources are based solely in English and based solely in a white woman's perspective. So I did that story at the beginning saying, what do we need to do to make sure we expand resources, make sure women who are in desperate need are getting the help they need during this time where no one knows what's really going on, but of course being locked in one space with someone who's so unsafe, it's like there's nowhere to go anymore. So really being able to take my coursework and really approach how I'm doing interviews, talking to people, and really using my work as activism or bringing different stories to light that I don't think we talk a lot about in this in the state or really in the country. So I think that's how I really used my coursework in order to bring light to things that we would really rather keep either very white or very underground.
I can speak to that a little bit, because I think for me, pursuing the master's, you know, I had been out of school for a little while, which actually made the first semester kind of difficult. Like, it was really hard to get my bearings. And remember how to write and read, and I mean, definitely school is a skill set in and of itself that, yeah, I had to get refreshed on. But I think it's been a little while, so it's hard to remember the exact titles of courses, but for the most part, there wasn't a class that didn't give me something incredibly valuable. And one of the things that, you know, I think you're kind of mentioning that emotional quality. There was like a huge component of self-exploration that I was able to do with a lot of the coursework in American Studies that helped me understand myself better. It helped me understand both some of the privilege and discrimination that I had experienced in my life better, and how to situate myself within that. In some ways, it gave me, you know, some of the texts and working through it in class, like, helped me develop a language to talk about my experience in a way that I hadn't really been able to articulate. So it was like a pretty significant personal journey for me to go through, one that really had its difficult moments, but also that I would do 10 times over again because it was that influential and transformative for me. And then I think, you know, so a lot of the coursework I took related to, because my interests are like around popular culture, visual culture, but truly like taking everything that was kind of, that, you know, that I was coming across, and some of the required classes were always helping me think differently. And I think, Alyosha, was actually one of your classes where I was able to do kind of a survey of like literature about museums. And so I had been like interning at a museum, but not really like engaging with the history of museums and the work that they do. And so that was one of my first opportunities to really start digging into that, to the point where when I was done with my MA, I was like, I'm never gonna work at a museum. And so it was, I think, a really actually interesting opportunity for me to like take something that I really loved, get super critical about it, and have a fight with it a little bit, and then like emerge in this other place where now it really is critical to how I think about the work that we're doing in that space.
Thanks so much. I don't know if either of you want to add anything. I know you kind of spoke a little bit to this.
I did, I cheated.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
But what I will say is I really relate to that, like the personal journey, because I think American Studies, it allowed me to have a language to put to sort of my own moral compass that was already there, but to have almost more protection for it heading into law school. Law school is a very hard place. It was very challenging for a variety of reasons, having nothing to do with the coursework, and having this sort of grounding to almost like its own like intellectual support system, knowing that, you know, the way I might think about something, I'm not alone. Going into a space where there are a lot of people that don't care at all about any of these things, and being able to have that sort of protection and that self-analysis, you know, as you move forward in a profession where having a good, strong moral compass is really useful, I think, to maintain those ethics. And that was really, I mean, invaluable to have that and have that protection.
For me, as an American Studies student, I was able to incorporate my experience with the prison industrial complex into my writing and coursework. American Studies led me to examine critical race theory that has been foundational to framing my arguments for basic human dignity. My writing became an emotional and healing experience for me as I was able to tell my story academically. I did a slideshow presentation in transgender studies with Professor Amy Branzel called Queer Prison Abolition and Transgender Movements to Freedom, in which I was able to center the experiences of incarcerated queer and transgender folks. In my Latinx sexualities course with Professor Francisco Golarte, I did a presentation called Sylvia Rivera's Legacy to center the experience of queer youth who become the target of surveillance and policing when they escape from hostile home environments. And CYFD is another reason I switched my major to American Studies. One really hard and emotional class was the War on Terror coursework with Professor Nick Estes. This course allowed me to understand how legalized slavery and state violence has evolved since the war on drugs. And so I will say that American Studies also, the coursework helped me to unlearn a lot of conditioning that happened while I was incarcerated. It allowed me to speak power to real experiences in there, and so I've learned to be really careful about the way I talk about systems of harm.
Thank you all so much for sharing that. What other kind of skills or knowledge that you encountered in your American Studies classes have helped you in your career? I think some of you have spoken to this, but is there anything else that you want to share with the group? And then I think we're going to open it up for Q&A from all of you.
I got one more thing. So my senior thesis, it was called Abolish Human Silencing, Transformative Justice for Gender Equality, Racial Equity, and Reparations, and it required research on felon disenfranchisement. My thesis allowed me to be able to reference historical context to dismantle the arguments coming from the opposition. The American Studies program provided me with the opportunity to refine my advocacy work to become an effective community organizer. I chose to work with Ault because our policy work aligns with transformative justice, and in the sense that we seek to address harms in ways that do not perpetuate more harm. And the direct participation of Ault members is how we create a community that we want to live in. Aside from gaining historical knowledge to dismantle arguments coming from those who uphold systemic racism and oppression, one of the most important skills I've learned in American Studies program is that language matters. So I've become very intentional with the words I use in order to change and control the narrative. I've decolonized the way I talk about myself and other people with person-first language. When I talk about crime and public safety, I refrain from using language that justifies state violence and dehumanization. So I refrain from words like felon, addict, convict, and criminal to describe a community that already suffers, because this language is internalized and we act accordingly. This type of disparaging language has the same effect of calling an undocumented person illegal. So I deliberately use language that acknowledges the humanity of a person. For example, formerly incarcerated person who has made a mistake, a person who's committed a murder. We all make mistakes, and none of us should be called the worst thing we've ever done. As humans, we are not our crimes. And I realized the importance of intentional language when I learned how colonizers used renaming as a tool of oppression. So decolonizing language is for me, it's the deliberate resistance to imperialism and white supremacy.
So much. Anyone else? Any other comments on that?
A couple things I can
Yeah.
add to that. I think was thinking about this question, and a few things came to mind, and now I'm thinking of another one. One is that writing my thesis was when I learned to stop procrastinating, which has actually served me really well.
Did it work?
Forward. It kind of worked, yeah. Like I had.
That's awesome.
It was like, honestly, it was the first time that I was like, okay, map this out. Do this amount of work every single day. It'll allow you to rest, but like you have to do it, like that much work every day. And it wasn't always perfect or seamless by any means, but I mostly did it that way. And at the end was like, oh my God, this made such a huge difference. So I think about that a lot because planning exhibitions is like really large scale project management basically. And it's important for us to like keep a pace all the time because at the end you cannot cram it all in. At the end it doesn't work that way. So that's been a really useful skill set, and I don't know that necessarily anyone taught me that per se, but American Studies was the place where I learned how to kind of stop procrastinating, and it was helpful. But otherwise, I think I was thinking about critique. I in American Studies really developed a really strong foundation of the like theoretical approaches to critique that inform my work a lot right now. There's a lot of working with the public that we're kind of experimenting most of the time around what works, what ideas work, how do we kind of bridge this theory and practice idea. But I think that bringing a critical eye for, I work within an institution. My institution is part of state government. Museums themselves are really founded in colonial logics. They replicate it over and over and over again. There's hierarchies in knowledge and culture and value and how we present those things, and I think that it's been extremely useful to bring that critical eye into that space every day to ask myself, like, are we doing harm or are we disrupting something? And it's not always perfect. Like, there's some moments where I look back on things and I'm like, oh man, you thought you were doing this, but you really ended up reinforcing something else. And that's kind of a learning process, I think, especially working within institutions, that can be really difficult. But that was cool. And then I think really exploring different methodologies has also been a thing that's come into to my work, where looking at, again, there's like no one size fits all. Every project is different. The people we're working with have different needs and different ideas about what they want to do. And so it's really just kind of thinking about multiple ways to get to where we want to be, and experimenting with that a little bit. And I think those are things that, like, at least the idea part was like really starting to percolate in the coursework at American Studies.
I can add to that. I think what I learned specifically in American Studies was having a close attention to detail to so many things. I think as I went through each course, the information just kept building on top of one another, which was really helpful to me in critical thinking, like everyone else mentioned. But how do we focus in on one thing, but also make it universal of what we're learning and how we can apply it? And I think in my senior thesis, which was on defunding the police, I really thought about how can I have a critical eye but also pay really close attention to the history of policing and why people are outraged and why people may have that sense of misinformation and disinformation, which that comes full circle back into my work at KUNM. How do we disrupt this news cycle that's, oh, this is what happened, very cut and dry, one perspective, out the door. So I try to now approach my work like I approached my senior thesis of, this is the story, these are the perspectives, and really fact check it, which does require a lot of attention to detail as you're going through interviews, you're going through research. You have to make sure that each thing you're asking for or each thing you're writing is factual, because people are so hot topicked about misinformation, disinformation, because I think we're so caught up in this cycle of, well, this is what I believe, so this is what I'm going to search out to confirm. So I think American Studies really pushed my beliefs, challenged my thinking, and hopefully I've been able to weave that into my reporting.
There's a lot of ways that I apply American Studies because I just love it so much to my work. I took a class, and I can't remember what the title was because, like I said, I'm old and it was a really long time ago, but it was something about movement building. And it was about movement building and the history of different revolutions across the world. Very focused though on the Americas. And I think about that class, and I think about some of the things that I read when I think about legislative advocacy. Because, have you guys ever seen that little video where there's like a singing bill? And it's like, this is how well, I don't know the song, but you know what I mean, right? And it like goes through, and it seems like difficult, but kind of simple and really straightforward. But it's not at all what it's like, right? You're dealing with power. And in order to be effective, you have to play the whole board, not just, okay, I'm going to talk to people, I'm going to talk to them about the bill, hopefully they'll vote for it, and let's see how this goes. It's a very huge exercise in power and how you manage all of these different entities that don't really want to do what you want them to do, right? It's organizing both the grassroots and the grass tops and everything in between. And I think about that class and reading about all the different uprisings across, on the global scale, but specifically in the Americas, and how they were able to do things or failed. And I think about that a lot when I'm thinking about legislative advocacy. because the ability to manage power and navigate that is extremely difficult, and it's not straightforward. So that was really useful. As far as my thesis was concerned, before I became a public defender, I worked in drug policy, because that's my heart. And and I had to try and find my thesis, because again, it was such a long time ago. But I talk about my thesis all the time. I just couldn't really remember what the title was. And it was, but within that, I was looking at the history of drug laws in our country and what really, why do we have drug laws? What was that? And I'm always talking about that still to this day, right? The purpose of drug laws were really just to criminalize particular people in their labor, right? The first drug law, right, is in San Francisco, and it's all the Chinese immigrants that came to build the Transcontinental Railroad. Then, you know, people in San Francisco decide, we don't really want them here anymore, so let's make opium illegal, and let's make people think that they were rapists. And that's what they did, right? And looking at that sort of trajectory, and all of that informs my work doing criminal legal reform every day, whether it's drug policy or outside of it. And it's so wonderful to sort of dig in the history, because you can have small little conversations with legislators who maybe don't know that, right? And they dig into it, and then maybe they trust you just a little bit more so that you can push that policy a little bit further. And I know Justin has experience with this too, because he's been working the legislature pretty hard also, and can speak to all of the ways in which sort of that power dynamic is extremely challenging. But it's invaluable, this program, really.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Is there anything else that any of you want to add? I mean, you've shared so much with us, but I don't want to cut you off before we open things up for from questions from everyone else. Okay. I think. Well, first of all, let's give a round of applause for our panel. And I just wanted to see if any of you have questions for the panel or for myself, the undergrad director, Professor Goldstein, the graduate director. We don't have to record this part, but